in the shadowed halls of the 17th century French court, where power was a whispered word and secrets clung to the air like heavy perfume, a queen lived in silent terror. This was Anne of Austria, wife of King Louis XIII, a woman whose name would become entwined not just with political intrigue, but with a fear so profound it would shape her very existence. It was a fear of something we now consider essential, pure and life-giving: water. To understand her story, we must step back into an era where science and superstition were locked in a deadly dance, where the simplest act of hygiene could be seen as a dance with death itself. Born in Anne's childhood was steeped in the rigid piety of the Spanish court. Her days were governed by strict religious observances and the solemn traditions of the Habsburg dynasty. When she arrived in France at the age of 14 to marry the young Louis XIII, she was a stranger in a foreign land, thrust into a world of shifting allegiances and cultural clashes. The vibrant, often frivolous French court was a stark contrast to the austere environment she had known. She was an outsider, and her every move was scrutinized, her every custom judged. In this climate of uncertainty, another, more insidious fear was spreading across Europe. This was the age of the Great Plagues, and medical understanding was rudimentary at best. Doctors, the most learned men of their time, held a terrifying belief that water was a carrier of disease. They preached that bathing was a dangerous act, that immersing the body in water opened the pores, creating gateways for pestilence and sickness to invade. To wash was to invite illness, to court death. This wasn't just a fringe theory, it was mainstream medical doctrine, a belief held by kings and commoners alike. For a queen already wrestling with the pressures of her new role, this medical dogma became an obsession. Anne of Austria embraced this fear with the same fervor she applied to her faith. She stopped bathing, not for a week, not for a month, but for years. The ritual of washing, a simple act of cleanliness, was replaced by an elaborate yet ultimately futile routine. Each day, her ladies-in-waiting would apply layers of scented powders and thick, perfumed oils to her skin. The most expensive fragrances from grass were used to mask the inevitable, but the scent of roses and jasmine could not conquer the odor that began to emanate from the Queen's unwashed body. At first, it was a subtle, unspoken reality within her private chambers. But soon, the whispers began. Courtiers, who once vied for a place in her presence, started to recoil. They described the air around her as heavy, oppressive. One chronicler wrote that her stench was so potent it seemed like poison in the air. It was said to be a complex, horrifying aroma mix of stale perfume, sweat, and something else, something akin to decay. Servants who had to dress her or attend to her needs would reportedly hold their breath, their faces pale with revulsion. The queen, once a symbol of royal grace, was becoming an object of morbid curiosity and disgust. Imagine the psychological torment. Anne was trapped in a prison of her own making, built from the bricks of contemporary medical advice and her own deep-seated anxieties. Every mirror would have reflected a queen caked in powders, her skin hardening into a grotesque shell. She wasn't simply dirty, she was entombed. Her fear was not irrational, not by the standards of her time. It was a logical conclusion drawn from the expert opinions she trusted. She believed she was protecting herself, preserving her life and the potential for an heir by adhering to this grim regimen. The very act she thought was saving her was isolating her, turning her into a pariah in her own court. The political consequences were swift and brutal, and already had powerful enemies. Most notably the cunning and influential Cardinal Richelieu. Her condition became a weapon used against her. Rumors were currency in the court of Louis XIII, and tales of the foul queen spread like wildfire. Her Spanish origins were used to paint her as foreign, unclean, and untrustworthy. Her enemies suggested that her physical state was a reflection of a corrupt soul, a tainted loyalty to France. Her influence waned. Louis XIII, a complex and distant husband, grew even more estranged from her. How could he share a bed with a woman whose smell was a constant, suffocating presence? Her inability to produce an heir for over 2 decades was blamed, in part, on her bizarre habits, further weakening her position. The court became a theater of embarrassment. Foreign dignitaries would arrive, expecting to be charmed by the Queen of France, only to be met with an olfactory assault that left them stunned. The opulent splendor of the Louvre Palace, the shimmering silks and sparkling jewels, could not distract from the unavoidable truth. The Queen, the heart of the court, was the source of a deeply unsettling rot. Her private tragedy had become a public spectacle, a national shame. For years, she endured this self-imposed exile from cleanliness. It wasn't until much later in life, after the death of Louis XIII and Richelieu, when she became regent of France, that her habits reportedly began to change. As her political power grew, perhaps her deep-seated fears began to subside, but the legend had already been forged. So we are left to wonder how much of this dark tale is unvarnished truth, and how much is a caricature drawn by the poisoned quills of her rivals. Histories are written by the victors, and Anne had many enemies eager to tarnish her legacy. Was the stench truly as potent as they claimed? Or was it a convenient and cruel exaggeration to undermine her authority? The accounts are vivid, disturbing, and come from multiple sources. Yet, they also serve a clear political purpose. The story of Austria's fear of water exists in the murky space between historical fact and political slander. It's a haunting reminder that in the grand theater of history, a person's legacy can be defined not by their deeds, but by the rumors whispered in the corridors of power. The queen who feared water became a ghost in her own lifetime. Her story a cautionary tale, leaving us to question where the woman ends and the legend begins. Thank you for watching. If you found this journey into the dark corners of history fascinating, be sure to subscribe for more stories.